your original sort of observation about getting God out of the problem of evil.
Yeah.
Phails at philosophy.
Why does this not emerge within Buddhism in the way it does within Western philosophy?
Yeah.
If that's true. And I think there's a way, there's at least a very different way in which Buddhist thought is thinking about this problem of agency. Because that really seems to be what's being explored here more than free will is agency.
Yeah.
As a more kind of universal framework.
It's a good segue into the Buddhist side.
Right.
And it began with, hey, they really haven't thought about this.
Right. I mean, are we really just dealing with a problem that is a problem of theism, that is a problem of a insistence on understanding the world as a world which has a ground, and a ground which has an agency, right? Because I think at the end of the day, like, if you're working within a deterministic world, you then do end up with these problems like first causes. You do end up with like what brings about the whole thing.
Yeah.
I just think it's a more rational response confronting that to say this exposes fundamental problems with this way of reasoning through the problem, right? That this is insufficient to capture the whole of what I'm experiencing as a human and understanding it.
We'll always be insufficient in reasoning.
And
we won't ever be sufficient in reasoning.
And the problem with reason is about an experience of going from confusion to clarity, right?
To the illusion of clarity.
No. I want to hold off on that.
Okay.
Right? It goes from
taking my data sets, making and building a model of the world based on the data sets that I have.
My experience of reason as a useful tool is is on that. Like, I notice that, hey, if I look at the world and I think about it in this careful way, I get clarity. I get a better understanding of the world, right? That experience is so powerful for us that we mistaken that clarity for reality. And I think it's a good way to think about, if you use the metaphor of light, right? And for clarity, when you walk into the room and you turn on the light, you suddenly have clarity.
You can see things. You can see,
but you can't see it all, right? And to think that just because the light has come on,
you might be able to see 90% more than you could see before, but there's still this 10% or this unknown,
right? And you consider it, and then you discover there's other spectra of light that your brain can't
there's other
see,
right. Infrared.
And it's a bigger world, than you thought. So I don't know, like, I think there's two kind of reactions that I see when you dig into these problems of determinism. And they're really, like, interestingly affective, right? You know, like, I see people who, when they dig into it, they're like, get excited. They're like, it's all determined. There's no, like, there's almost this, like, the whole world is full. You have no free will.
Fatalism.
Like, you've got, but there's
destiny. That's the destiny.
But there's almost this, like, triumphalist, like,
we've told these stories. Dune is a story of fatalism.
Right, exactly.
You know, we've got these through time. There's a story of a messiah. Someone comes.
Right.
Even Oedipus is a story of, you know, fatalism.
Right. And I think, you know, where does that come from? Well, one is this anxiety. Like, you know, the problem with free will is it's a lot of responsibility. It's anxiety producing to be confronted with your choices and the responsibility that your choices might have real effects. And fatalism presents this beautiful framework to say, I can just chill because it's all
I can do whatever I want.
Right.
Because whatever I want is what I'm destined to do.
Right. And that's the sort of palliative. And I mean, like, a few minutes later, we're like, well, what do I want to do? Like, and you're still in the problem, because then if you say, well, I can do what I want, I'm going to follow my desires, then you have a second set of problems. What are my desires and how do those produce things?
Yeah.
And, you know, and so you're still caught in this choice-making web, right?
For some reason, something that came up for me around this, I started thinking of how does self-help, personal growth, personal development? How does all of this play into it? Because we're able to say, we're able to think, the reason I'm coming up with these frameworks of the world, the reason I'm building these worlds this way is because of some past trauma, or because I'm building imperfect models that are having me respond to the world in a way that doesn't give me the kind of outcomes I want, right? If you had, you know, experiences in the world that built a model where all people were bad and all people were going to rob you or trick you in some way, and then you met everybody with this skepticism and this like tight, then you go and you say, I'm going to balance that out with the world is good, or I'm going to give myself affirmations or do all these things. Then you're able to have choice in what you look at, have choice in how you're gonna, I don't know, it's like you're putting light on the world. That seems to be some kind of agency decision, and it moves me to, if that makes sense, it moves me to the Buddhist part where they're saying, we've got this Four Noble Truths, we've got this Eightfold Path. There has to be an ability to move towards that. There has to be an ability to decide to be a bodhisattva, to to break free of something requires,
Yeah, I mean that's how he ends the chapter, and I think that, I mean, as much as I think he's more giving because he gives this sort of Western take on free will, and then he gives this very brief, very like academic, like this person says this person says this, about trying to map the discussion of free will. Mostly
more Western.
Well, and mostly he seems to be saying like, yeah, there's a conversation here. People are mapping out. I don't think it's the same conversation as is happening in Western free will because they didn't read Augustine, right? Like, and I don't know. Like, I'm interested in digging it, and he's like, I'm less interested in this history of what people actually said than from a philosophical perspective. And I see what he's doing. He's saying like, look, if we look at Buddhism as a philosophical system that accepts particular axioms, right? Because really he's operating within a framework. Given these certain things we accept as true, we accept causation as true. We don't accept causation as true because we have any reason to believe it, except that it, as a rule, provides us with a larger structure of knowledge that we can make sense of the world with, right? Yeah. The warrant for causation is not that we see it. The warrant for causation is that what we see makes better sense if we have the rule of causation.
Right.
It's an axiom, right? Well, let's say that a basic axiom in Buddhism, and this is where he ends, remember, is that you can be enlightened.
You can make a choice that
well,
leads you to enlightenment.
Right. And that, I think he expresses it's like so that a being with consciousness can engage in certain kinds of meditative states that will lead to enlightenment, right? You can't make sense of that without a notion of agency.
Which is weird, because you go back, he ends the chapter that way, but you go a little bit further back and he goes back into the two truths, right? He talks about the conventional truth,
right,
and the absolute truth.
Right.
And the absolute truth is there's no self, there's no consciousness. All of this is an illusion, And then the conventional truth is, yeah, you've got agency, you've got free will, you can do whatever you want. So we're kind of playing that same both ands thing where those can't live together.
At least they can't live together when we're existing here. I mean, I think the conceit is there's some type of state of consciousness that requires more than thinking through it.